Hi there. I am coming on today to record this episode, honestly, because I saw I saw something that disturbed me, and I think what ultimately will happen is that this episode will serve to hopefully be a comfort and potentially a guide for people who are early on in their own grief journey. And I think I'm going to be speaking to parents who have lost children, but of course, a lot of things inside of grief are universal. And so this could potentially be a good episode for anybody who is grieving. So, what I ended up seeing was on Instagram, and a longtime girlfriend of mine, like from when we were children, sent me this kind of little meme or reel, an Instagram reel about a mother who had just lost her child. And she was talking about how she wouldn't be the same. And it's only been a month. And so I went on to, um, I went on to just leave my condolences. And um, what really it really surprised me. I mean, I guess I've known because I've been on the receiving end of it, but I don't spend a ton of time in like grief spaces intentionally. Um, and so I've known that people don't always say great things, to grieving parents. We don't know what to say, how to advise them, or how to help them. And so we say things um, that are just unhelpful. So some of like there was a comment on here that like shocked me, and that's why I came on to record this. But um, some of the like not helpful, but I understand the idea of commiserating is like things like, yeah, I can't imagine losing my child. I don't think I'll ever be happy again. And then there are some comments from parents who have lost children, and they talk about just how they've never gotten over it, and the agony inside of that. And I'm sure I haven't been in as many years. I'm sure that is very true. Then there's some other comments about never feeling joy again. Like I've heard losing your child is awful and you'll never feel any joy ever again. And I'm like, I just don't see how any of this stuff is helpful. And it just hasn't been my experience whatsoever inside of my grief journey that joy isn't something that we would feel. And then I saw a comment from somebody because this mother had been having this is a baby that was lost in utero. And so the mother had been having some complications and was worried that this might be the outcome. And so she had asked for prayers from her community. And so then there was a mother or somebody who came on and literally said, because you spoke it, you made it happen. Which I was just like, oh my God, how can you say that to a grieving person? Like, if you get news from your doctor that there is a potential issue, um, or, like in my case, my son was using um, drugs. And so it's like when your child is an addict and using drugs and you're not able to get them to stop, no matter how hard you try, it is a logical um thought that they might die, but that does not mean that you have made it happen. That is new age bullshit. There are all types of contracts and things that go on in the spirit realm before people incarnate. There are, of course, Christian beliefs about God, and really, we are not that powerful. We are not. I mean, we are powerful, but we are not in control, not over life and death in that way. That's just not true. That soul, the baby itself, my own son, they have their own sovereign contracts and That soul is its own sovereign soul and had its own journey, right? And so that mother saying that she was worried about her child, or me being worried about the outcome of my son's drug addiction, did not mean that I killed him. And it does not mean this mother killed him. Okay, so that, like, we can just get out of the way up front. Don't ever talk to people like that. I don't think I should have to say that, but obviously some adult person thought that that was a normal thing to say online to somebody who is grieving, which is not. But I wanted to talk about kind of like why I think people get or have some of these ideas about their, never being able to experience joy again. Or, I know that one of my fears early on in the grieving process was that I would never be happy again, that I'd never be okay again, that I was going to be wearing a cloak of heaviness and sadness for the rest of my life because I had lost my child. And I want to talk about the archetype of the grieving mother and how our culture holds loss, child loss in that way, which is a fairly new phenomenon. Like if you think about parents in the, just 100 years ago, it was almost, I mean, I don't want to say it was almost guaranteed, but it was quite normal that you would lose one of your children or that you potentially would die in childbirth, right? So it wasn't an odd phenomenon at all to have a life expectancy like that all your children would live. I know a mother with 10 children and all her children are alive, and that's like incredibly awesome. um but just several decades ago or a century ago, even, people were not expected to keep all of their children. And I think it speaks to this cultural phenomenon that we have as a life-centric culture, meaning we prize life at all costs in our culture. We have figured out how to prolong life. Medicine can do miraculous and incredible things. It's kind of part of our religious dogma that like we prize life, and in a lot of like the religious communities, life is a really important thing. And of course it is important, but death is also important. It's an important gateway for many people. Death is a healing, right? Like if for my son, I believe death was a healing. He was not able to be healed of his affliction in this lifetime or in this world, despite trying. He tried. I tried to help him. And after some time has gone by and I've really contemplated, the nature of him leaving, I do have peace around the idea that his soul is at rest, like that brings me some comfort in the midst of the terrible, and living a timeline or a reality that I really didn't ever want to live, and still don't want to be living it. I still cry and miss him. I was rocking his urn the other day, just kind of lamenting. I mean, I have really sad moments, but you're supposed to, it's part of the journey of grief. It's part of what we sign up for as mothers. We sign up for a love that deep. And so when our child dies, the pain is immense, and it's supposed to be. And we are still alive, right? Like we did not die. And the love that we share with our child is so unlike any other love. Our child would never want us, the soul of our child. Our children are innocent, and the souls of children are innocent. And all they would want for us as their mothers, as a potential sibling, is for us to go on and to love their siblings and to love their family and to give the love that we have for them away to other people and to feel deep, deep joy. So for me, I have a friend who lost a child. And so I was fortunate enough to get advice from her. And one of the first things she told me was that this is going to be a journey. It's going to be hard, and you're going to need to walk it mostly alone. And she had done the kind of going into grief groups, like support groups online, and then left them. And so I kind of had the knowledge of her experience leaving grief groups, but she had told me I might want to join something. She's like, you might want to like just join some grief groups online and get some support if you're feeling like you need to. So I did, because I thought that's what I should do. I didn't know what to do. In the beginning, I didn't know what to do. So I did a lot of different stuff, you know. Um, and one of the first things I noticed inside the grief group was this thing that felt like a curse, right? So I'm reading these comments that are kind of like the comments that were on this page, where, you know, there's parents who are saying things like, I haven't gotten out of bed for however long, or it's been this long and I feel like my spirit is dead. And and I feel like I'm, I can't, like my life is nothing. And, um, this like protracted, really kind of like dark sense of suffering. And I'm an archetypal astrologer. I work with archetypes. So I recognized right away that this was an archetype that I was seeing. And I began to compare myself to it, because the experience I was having wasn't exactly like that experience. My experience started to become very mystical, and um, I felt like I was connecting with Tanner, and that was helping to boost, how I was feeling. So it wasn't like it was in my robe all the time. I also felt Tanner the most when I was outside. So I had a walking practice before he died, and I decided that I would keep this walking practice. And so, um, you know, I started walking. So it made me get up every day. It made me get out of the house. It made me move my body and get some exercise and stuff. So, um, I would read these comments in these group pages, and I would start to think like, oh my God, is something wrong with me? I'm not having this kind of grief experience. Maybe it means I didn't love him enough. Or I mean, the mind is crazy. It really is insane when you're grieving, and it's supposed to be, an insane thing happened to you. Your child has died. And so you're supposed to feel a little insane. And I started to have these really insane thoughts about maybe I was doing grief wrong. The other thing that my friend told me was that because the relationship I had with Tanner was my own, there was no other mother for him. There was no other mother-son relationship between a boy named Tanner and a woman named Damascena. Um, so my grief journey would be my own. So I decided to leave those groups, because what I was doing was comparing myself to the archetype of a grieving mother, and then um I could see the like compulsion to want to play out the role. Like I could see that if I stayed in there long enough and started to identify with these parents, that I might find myself in a bathrobe for several weeks at a time, or close myself off in a room. And so I left and decided that I would have my own very unique experience with Tanner, and I would partner with him and have him be the person that I walked through the grief journey with. Because, you know, one of the things that I've noticed about grieving is, because the other person isn't here per se in the same way they were before, there are parts of the grief journey that can be very narcissistic. Like we're the only one showing up inside of it, right? So it's like it's just us, and it's all about us and how we're feeling and how we're doing. And there's nothing wrong with that. It should be, like we're transforming through our heart being cracked open by grief, and we're supposed to be. Um, and it's okay that it's like that. And we don't have to commiserate with other people. We don't need to find companionship inside of our grief through comparing stories about how much we're suffering. Like that's not necessarily helpful. And I could get very early on from Tanner that that's not at all what he wanted from me. Like want, I could feel very strongly, even if as I talk about it now, Tanner loved to have adventures and experience. And um, it's weird to say he loved life because, he was a complex, nuanced person, but he did love to have fun and to laugh. And he was a lover and he really loved people and the people he was around. He had a deep spiritual heart. And there's no way, knowing him, he would want me to spend an inordinate or like an extreme amount of time just suffering because I had a contract with suffering, because our society says that if you lose a child, this has to be the worst thing that ever happened to you. And so we overlay the idea that this is supposed to be the worst thing that ever happened to us onto our experience, because it seems like there's some kind of contract. And that if we aren't having the worst time that we've ever had in our lives, it must mean something about how the depth of the love that we had for our child. And that just isn't true. And so I think, one of the first things I want to say to people who are newly grieving is to really map what the archetype of a grieving mother or a grieving parent is for yourself. Like find the cultural memes, like start to see, like, how does our collective hold the grieving mother? And you can feel it projected onto you in the way that people come up to you and kind of handle you with kid gloves and treat you like you're fragile and you might break. And um and they say things to you like, this has got to be the most awful thing that has ever happened to you. And in a lot of ways, it is one of the most awful things that ever has happened to me. I've had quite a few dark nights of the soul, um, and quite a bit of familial loss in terms of parents and siblings as well. So, I mean, all loss is really, really hard. And there are gifts inside of every loss, and Tanner has given me gifts inside of his loss, and taught me things, and um, walked with me as his ancestor. And so while of course it is hard, I don't want to make a contract that this has to be the worst thing that ever happened to me. It likely will be, and I hope it is, but I'm not sure that's how I want to hold it. Like I don't want to, I don't know how to explain it exactly, like tarnish his memory, like him dying. Like his life is a blessing. And the story, his death is part of his story. And there are ways that his death has and will continue to bless me in the way that it has cracked me open so deeply to life and to love and to what really matters in life. And I feel like if I had this contract to have this archetypal experience of a grieving mother, I'd be missing out on all of the gifts that people, or that Tanner has for me and that other people have for me. I wouldn't be open to love in the same way that I am. And if you've listened to some of my other podcasts, you'll know that idea of opening to love was a really big thing. It was the first thing that Tanner told me to do after he died, was that if I would just open as wide as I possibly could to receive the love that was being given to me, that he would provide enough of it. And so, yeah, I think I would have missed that. So that's the first thing I would say to people who are newly on the path. Like, start to map what the archetype of a grieving parent is, so that you can see when you're starting to go into that, and where the edges of your own authentic experience with grief is, the transformational essence of the journey you're supposed to be having with grief, versus where you're just overlaying the experience of the archetype onto your grief journey, and it's not serving you. It's just feeding the pain body with with suffering and with our contracts with suffering. And so I hope I'm saying that clearly. Like, just map what the meme is so that you know, like, okay, that's how our culture holds grief. But I'm not exactly feeling that way. So I'm going to step outside of the archetype or outside of the meme and have my own individual experience with my child or with whoever it is that I lost, so that it's mine and I get out of it what I'm meant to, like, whether you believe in God or spirit or source or the universe, every experience is that we meet on our path will enrich us in some way, even if there is pain involved. The pain is kind of like the tenderizer of our hearts. And so staying open to that, and also recognizing when we're not really on our own unique path, but we're overlaying archetypal tones onto our experience, it's helpful. So, okay, I wanted to say that. Let me see. I kind of made a list of some of the things that I wanted to say. Oh, so the other thing is too, so if it when so one of the first things I experienced with Tanner, and I talked about this on the Tao of Po podcast, and I really kind of went in deeply with it, but I'll mention it here too, is that when we first learn that our child has died or is not going to live, or we get the bad news that someone we love is going to die or has died, it generally precipitates a state of shock, which is what I've learned from shock is it's a phenomenal thing. It's part of the wisdom of our bodies, our body's own innate intelligence system that is meant to protect us. And as I was trying to like gauge out, like because you feel so tossed up in the air and it's so hard to orient yourself and to get your feet back on the ground after losing a child, that like you start to like look for anchors and things to grab onto, right? And the shock had me feeling like I was in and out of my body, and like I was observing my life from the outside. And that's why those grief groups and the archetype of a grieving mother were such easy things to want to cling on to, because they felt like sort of like anchors, or sort of like, giving a map to a very lost, hungry, and thirsty person. But as I started to realize that the shock was actually my body wisdom, right? And that the sense of dissociation I was feeling was not like, didn't actually mean I was lost. Like it was meant to help my body and my soul and my spirit not absorb the impact all at once of the loss. I started to like get clued in that I could trust my body. And before the pandemic hit, I worked as a childbirth doula and a postpartum doula, and in childbirth education, and worked with mothers who had traumatic births. And so um, I had a lot of experience about what the body does during pregnancy and to bring a child earthside, and like the real magic inside of labor. Like if you've ever been in a labor experience, you really, it's, I think the closest I've ever been to like the experience that God is absolutely real. Um, because the intelligence is just it's so incredible, like how you can go from sustaining a life inside of your body, birth that child, have that child lay upon the belly it just left, and then begin nursing, and your body is still sustaining that child. It's truly a miracle. And with a non heavily like a birth that doesn't have a lot of intervention, the body really does take care of it. I mean, even a mother in a coma who isn't in being coached at all on how to birth her baby, she can have a baby. The body will push the baby out. So you learn as a doula and attending hundreds of births, that you can really trust the body. There's something really magnificent that's happening. And so when I realized that shock was the same function, and that my body knew how to grieve my child the same way it knew how to birth my child, or said another way, that my body knew how to walk my child out of this realm in the same way it knew how to bring my child into this realm. It made a huge difference to the orientation and to the sense of like lostness that I felt inside of inside of my grief journey. It really helped to ground me, to just kind of be able to sit back and ask myself, well, what does my body need? What is my body saying? And letting my body lead instead of my mind. The mind can create so much suffering when a child dies, because as parents, we're asking ourselves how we contributed to it. Could I have done something differently if I had just gone to the doctor earlier, like in the case of a pregnancy, or, you know, if I had ate better, all of the things. I've had a miscarriage. I know there's so many things inside of that, like where we take over responsibility, or, and my son was an adult, but he was a very young adult, a 22-year-old adult. So I've done that thing where I go back to kindergarten and say, if I had just made a different choice in kindergarten, maybe he wouldn't have had some of the issues with anxiety that he did, or, you know, um, if his home life was even more stable than it was, perhaps I could have, or how did I miss that sign? Things like that. And so when we allow the mind to lead, it can just generate nonstop stories that feed the pain body, which creates suffering. And those stories are generally, if you really look at them, those stories generally are part of those contracts that we have with suffering. We're supposed to be suffering because we lost a child. And it keeps us outside of the actual catharsis and pure or organic or natural pain of grief, and the process of me moving grief through the body. And that is the process that leaves us feeling whole on the other side. So like when I have a bout of grief move through, I really make sure that the mind doesn't come in and hijack that bout of grief. And I feel it's when I feel close to Tanner, I figured out that those types of grieving experiences, that type of catharsis inside of grief that's pure, that doesn't have story involved in it, that isn't lamenting over what my life is going to look like now that I've lost him, and isn't creating and generating story. It is like the biological way that we feel close to the people we've lost. It's inside those moments of lament, and inside those moments of keening, that I feel reunited with him. And then on the other side of that type of grief experience, when all of the tears have moved through, maybe it takes 20 minutes or an hour or several hours. Sometimes it lasts a whole day, not as much anymore. But in the beginning, you'll have that experience where it lasts the whole day. But if you just let it move through the way, like rain on a summer day moves through naturally and organically, and don't let the mind start churning up the ground, like churning up the sediment, you will feel like dew covered grass on a spring morning. There is a biological cascade of hormones that happens inside of that kind of grieving, that, like, yes, we feel the loss, we feel the missing, we feel the vacuum of the space, but that it all feels very precious and very sacred. And we can have real reverence for the space that isn't filled with the person we thought we would love, and not necessarily, instead of filling it with stories, just filling it with reverence, and you know the noticing of their loss, and like allowing the yearning that we have inside of those moments of missing to inform how we want to live and love. Like, I'll yearn for um the feel of Tanner's hair under my fingers. Like one of my favorite things to do was just to run my fingers through his hair. I'm a very affectionate mom and I really like to touch my kids, and I still can feel his t-shirt and his shoulder blades underneath my hand as I caressed his back, and the like silkiness of his hair underneath my fingers. And when I feel that like biological yearning to touch him and to hold him, I go and touch his brothers and sister, because what it's showing me is that there are people that need my love and that need to be on the receiving end of affection and care. And that's something that I want to be more present to now that I'm a grieving mother. It's something that I can be, and to because my heart is so cracked open, it's not like I'm just doing those things in passing anymore. It's like my children can really feel me inside of that affection. The love is so tangible because it's like from the bottom of my cracked open heart, that it's so tangible that um they can actually feel me, and the depth of that love gets translated. So I think, these are some important things to hold as we begin our grief journey. There are going to be moments when you are that cracked open, and your heart is just like broken, and all of the armor that you go through life with, because we all put on armor as part of our conditioning in our everyday lives. We've got to go out in the world and survive without getting hurt. All of that armor is gone and we are so raw. So we want to allow that rawness to be tinged by the sacred. And there's this saying that people who are grieving are the closest to God, and they've kind of got one foot in this life and one foot in the other. And I've definitely had that experience. And I have not wanted the essence, the spiritual essence of that part of this grieving experience to be taken away from me, because I thought I had to be the archetype of our cultural archetype of a grieving mom, or to fulfill some kind of contract with suffering to prove how much I love him, because I don't need that. I've actually discovered that the love I have for Tanner um can cross dimensions. It's galactic size love. And I don't need to worry about the moments that I have joy meaning anything other than in that moment I'm experiencing joy, and hopefully sharing it with somebody, because the grief always comes back. And there is something early on when we have a moment of laughing, or we have a moment of feeling happy, that the contract with suffering says you shouldn't be happy because you've lost your child and you'll never be happy again. And that's just not true. Our children wouldn't want us to not be happy or to not experience joy. Our soul doesn't want that. The experience our soul came here to have doesn't want that. Um, there is nothing but richness on this journey if you let it. And in the cauldron of that richness is, of course, pain and heartache and missing and longing and yearning and sadness, and sometimes prolonged sadness. But that doesn't mean we can't also have the other stuff. It doesn't mean that we don't go on. And it doesn't mean that our children's legacy isn't seated within us and that we don't carry that legacy forward in everything that we do afterwards. I feel like Tanner is involved in everything I do. He walks with me all day long. He works with me. He experiences sunrises and sunsets with me. Um, there's so many ways that um my journey has led me to understand that while he is gone in a very real way, and it would be a total bypass, some spiritual traditions hold that it's like souls never leave and that like there's nothing to be sad about or a person's in a better place, yada yada yada. No, I don't believe that. You're sad because you're a human and because somebody has died, and it's normal to be really really sad about that. But I have understood in a different kind of metaphysical or cosmic kind of context that my journey this year has been about figuring out, how do I be the mother to a child who's journeyed across the veil, who now lives on the other side? So I'm still very much Tanner's mom. He still feels like he's my kid. He still feels like he's part of our family and very much involved in everything that we're doing still now, just as much as he did before. He's just important, as important now as he was before. So, I mean, just allow your journey to be what it is without anybody else telling you what it should look like. You tell people how you're doing and how you're feeling. And when people tell you things like, it's going to be awful, you're going to be sad for X amount of years or whatever, you do not have to agree with that. You just don't. You can have the experience that you're meant to have, and you will have good days and you will have bad days, but it will be your experience if you don't make a contract like that for yourself, especially early on. So that's what I wanted to say. I hope this was helpful.